A huge key for me has been distinguishing the structure versus the content of things that I get anxious, worried, or fearful about. What you'll notice is that the structure of fear is always the same. It's something in the future that you're worried about, and then your mind generates worst case scenarios, and you experience those imageries in your head as if it's real. So you want to be able to discern that structure versus the actual content, whether it's a bear or whether it's your idea of the impending apocalypse. It's always the same structure. So when you can recognize and actually acknowledge fear for its structure and not get lost in the content and trying to prove to yourself whether the content is valid or not, then you can actually work with the emotion. This is where most of us really get caught. So it took me to work with shame and guilt to really start to notice that fear, anxiety, worry has the same kind of template. Guilt has a structure. I should do this, I shouldn't have done that. And it has that same structure, and it repeats itself, whether it's eating pizza or whether it's showing up in a conversation in a way that you feel like you should have done better or different. I should have, I shouldn't have done that. The structure is the same. The same is true with fear. Once you notice the structure, you can put the content aside and work with the pure energy, the pure emotion. I know that can be challenging, especially because fear is so jarring and it grabs our total attention sometimes so potently. But you want to be able to notice, kind of like this, like, oh, I have a fear. Rather than being like, this is what our minds do, is it points outwards to things and it says those are scary. Or it imagines a future and it's like that would be scary. But the fear is never in reality. I swear I saw a good an ad on Instagram of somebody talking about the same point. Like, the emotion is in you. The fear isn't out there, the fear is in here. So you want to acknowledge, oh, I have a fear. This is my favorite example. 10 of us could be out on a camping trip and we see a grizzly bear. One of us is a zookeeper. That person has worked with grizzly bears hundreds and hundreds of times and they have zero fear. Somebody else has had dozens of run-ins with grizzlies and they know all the protocol, how to deal with it. So they have a little fear, but not much. Somebody else has no idea. They've never seen a grizzly in the wild. All they know is that they're deadly and they're scared shitless. As you can see, the fear is not in the situation of seeing that bear. The fear is in each individual person. And they all have their own reasons or competence or justifications for why they should or shouldn't be afraid of that thing. But the fear or the emotion, like guilt, for instance, somebody might do something, they don't feel guilt for eating pizza. You eat pizza, you feel very guilty because you have a rule in your mind that I should do this and I shouldn't do this. Similarly, fear has its own structure in that way, and it pulls our attention in a similar way from similar rule sets. This shouldn't happen. And then we get focused on what we don't want to happen, and here's the real switcheroo, is you experience it as if it is happening in your body. Really take that in. If you're afraid of that grizzly bear attack, your body is experiencing like all the adrenaline. It almost is as if you're imagining it so hard that you kind of experience it in the inside. So the key for working with fear is also noticing, and this is the same with all of the emotions, that it's impermanent. So if you really think back, if you really tap back in, you'll notice that certain emotions that you had, they only last for a short period of time and then they're gone. So when you have that thing, let's say if you get guilty when you eat pizza, you get guilty, and then 4 hours later, you're doing something else, you're browsing the internet, you're with some friends, you're not guilty anymore. Really notice that. Because what the fear does, or what any emotion does, is it says, this is it, this is how it's always been, this is how it'll always be. And it colors your memories with the flavor of that emotion. So what you want to remember when you're in something is like, oh, this is a temporary experience, and I'm noticing the structure of it. And in this case, the content is this. And it might actually get pretty interesting for you if you really start to observe your fear, anxiety, and worry. You're like, oh, wow, so today I'm noticing the structure of fear, and the content is I have a phone call that I think is important. Wow. And then another day, you're noticing the structure of fear, and it's because you're late for something. And then another day, it's because you're imagining that something horrible will happen. And then you'll start to realize, you'll start to deconstruct and demystify what fear is. And you'll be able to really feel it in your body, and you'll be able to feel when it takes hold and how it lets go. This changes everything. I'm still in the process of working this out myself, but I'm trying to share with you the biggest gems that I've learned. So when you can actually notice the structure of it, you can actually notice the content as like, oh, that's just like a little bonus, like a side. Like, oh, for instance, I'm worried about this particular thing. And then you just notice like, wow, I'm having the exact same response to, I'll just make up two different things. This phone call with my boss, and then me imagining that my partner's cheating on me or something. Your body is reacting in the same way, and the mind is imagining these things in the future, and you start to really deconstruct how this works, how this sneaks into your consciousness. And this, okay, what I'm sharing with you is so powerful. What this does is it leads you down the path of snapping out of it. Like you might just find yourself in a moment, once you observe this well enough, deep enough, where you're like, so today I'm afraid of this. That's so weird. You're just like, okay, I'm afraid of this. And you're just with yourself, and you just snap out of it. And you're like, whoa, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And you're not bypassing, it's just consciousness is noticing its free will to choose or to not choose, to put its attention in a certain place. And it just works itself out when you just pay attention. The biggest problem though is that people don't want to study fear because they're afraid. They're afraid that they'll get more fearful. But what they're not realizing is that if you study it, then what can happen is you can demystify it, you can dethrone it as a thing, and you can stop being so fearful of it. So I hope this helps you. Lots of tips on mindfulness, lots of tips on fear. I love you. I'm out.